I'm Ekta. I'm Reader Kitab, and we are Reader Kitab, and very happy to be here today. And the last video just got it just died out when we started the live, and some glitch happened. Book that we are going to discuss today, and I'm just going to invite my fellow people with me who are going to talk to Gopinathji today. Hi, Neeraj, how are you?
Hi, Ekta.
Hi. So we are just waiting for Gopinath ji to join. And yeah, hi everyone. Welcome to this live. The last live segment just got disconnected, and we are back here. Also, we are going to talk today to this author. So okay, I guess Gopinath ji is here. I will just invite him. We are going to talk about this book. So stay tuned. And I'm pretty excited. We have lots of questions to ask him, and so much to discuss. Uh, Namaste, Gopinath ji.
Namaste,
Namas-
namaste,
Namaste.
everyone.
We were trying, but I guess you were not able to join us.
Correct.
Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Great. So, hi, I'm Ekta, and I have with me Neeraj,
Namaste
Hey.
to you. Namaste. This
Namaste,
is Neeraj.
namaste.
and also I have with me Anurag.
Namaste, Gopinath.
And we are from Reader Kitab. So very happy to be having you here today. And when we read this book, we had so many questions to ask to you. So we are very excited to have you here today and looking forward to this conversation. So hi everyone, whoever has joined us. We are Reader Kitab, and we are doing this exclusive talk with Gopinath Chandradas ji on his book, the Power of Karma Yoga. And this interview is also kind of powered by the collaboration between Reader Kitab and Jeko Publishing House. And we were fascinated by how Jeko has kind of brought in different books and different genres together, which we are going to talk about, and then you will know what we are saying and why we are saying this. So, Gopinathji, when we read this book, I was wondering particularly that being from an IIT background, doing your BTech and MTech from IIT Bombay, and then becoming a monk and also a life coach, and a motivational speaker, also being a part of the very renowned ISKCON temple group. I mean, what made you decide that to become a monk, or how did you decide? What was your spiritual awakening? Because we all are searching for that purpose in our lives, and we always think, अरे क्या करना है जिंदगी में, कुछ समझ में नहीं आ रहा है, क्या जीवन का मतलब क्या है? And then was that a eureka moment? Where was there a eureka moment that happened to you, that you decided that you want to become a monk and spread the awareness of Bhagavad Gita, in from whatever you have learned, which you have also talked about, multiple times.
Yeah. Speaking of a Eureka moment, will be very romantic. I understand that, but I don't think I have a fantastic story to share here. But nonetheless, maybe I can to some extent, in the sense that I had a good spiritual upbringing with my family. And I have been asked these questions several times before, and I have pondered over these questions also many times. Maybe if you ask me for a eureka moment, one particular instance, generally it is not. It's like a cluster of events that kind
Absolutely.
of shapes your destiny and shapes your decisions in life. I would be more pragmatic from that perspective, but nonetheless, there are certain instances which are more of an eye opener than the others. Okay, so I was like born in a more orthodox kind of background, and as you might be aware of this, this Brahmopadesham ceremony is done wherein you are given the sacred thread and things like that. And my parents had told me that you should never remove it from your body. It should not separate from your body from now on. And I was just 7 years old at that time, very innocent and God fearing also. So I distinctly remember while growing up, we had gone to some place and we were taking a bath in a river there. And after taking the bath in the river, when I came out of the river, I found that Janeu, the sacred thread, was missing. And then I started crying. I have kind of something horrible is going to happen now and things like that. But then as I grew up, I started reasoning things out. Uh, who is God? Where is God? And questions related to spirituality, questions related to rituals that my family used to conduct, and I never found really satisfactory answers. So my interest in spirituality started waning away. But then I think it was rekindled just prior to me getting into IIT, and then it was set ablaze, I would say, after I joined IIT when I came in touch with Gaurang Das ji. You must be knowing him.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So he used to come to IIT campus every week to conduct classes for us. So we were very fortunate to have very close association with him. And when I came in touch with him and when I came in touch with books of ISKCON, a lot of these logical questions got answered. So uh, the science behind the rituals, why we do what we do, all these very important questions. Of course, a lot of things are superstitious when it comes to Hinduism, but a lot of
Yeah.
things that are misunderstood to be superstitious are not actually superstitious. They got a very detailed science behind them, and I came to know about this science in greater detail. So that was an eye opener for me personally. And there is one particular instance when Gorang Das Prabhu, he used to sometimes we used to provide him a room. Uh, for him to kind of have his private study. He used to spend quite some time with us, so we used to arrange a room for him in the guest room, etc., for his private study, and that used to be the room that he occupied week after week in that way. So even he had this sacred thread, the Janevu, and the key to that room he had on his Janevu. So once I was accompanying him to the room and he was trying to open the room to get inside the room and he was struggling to kind of, open it. वो खुल नहीं रहा था. Somehow it was getting stuck. So then I was thinking what he's going to do next because it was my few initial interactions with him and initial interactions with ISKCON as a society also. And to my surprise, he removes his kurta first. The shirt that he was wearing, the kurta, he removes it first. And then he turns towards me and tells me, now see what I'm going to do. And then he removes his Janevu also. And after removing his Janevu, then he can apply his full strength to opening the lock with a key, right? And then he opens opens the door and then he gets in. And then I was wondering, I'm the same kid who cried when the Janevu came out of my body by mistake. And here, he's a really pragmatic monk, I felt, very realistic and very pragmatic, not ritualistic. And that was kind of, you can call it a eureka moment, where I could see uh, science and practicality merge with spirituality, right?
True.
So I was always looking for spirituality that was not just scientific but also practical. And in that particular instance, I felt spirituality couldn't be more practical here. He didn't think twice before removing his Janevu and for opening that door there, So if you ask for a eureka moment, I would say this was a eureka moment. But there are so many other instances which kind of combined together for me to take this decision, I would say.
And such a fascinating story and so real because most of us like you said, and you also laughed after that you said, I was god fearing, and then you also you very detailed elaborately explained that how we form that barrier and how we have those superstitions also in our mind. And that is so real because all of us in our real life, in our daily lives, also have a lot of those knots that we have kind of made around us, and we kind of follow that so blindly that we don't even feel about it.
Yeah, talking about the knots, if I may ask a question over here, Basically, I couldn't help because when I was reading your book in particular, I was also contrasting it automatically in my mind with the other book that we read in the book club when we interacted with the author also. And the name of the author is Anand Neelakantan, and he wrote the book The Asura Way. And it was fascinating because I kind of found that the books are talking about diametrically opposite things, because in his interview he says that India was always sold as like a spiritual land, but it was materialistic also. There were a lot of materialistic pursuits and be an asura and all of those things. And I was also fascinated by the fact that Jaico Publishing House basically picked up such diametrically opposite books. One is The Power of Karma Yoga, another is The Asura Way. So I guess my question to you is, as a reader, like Ekta said, we have a lot of knots in our heads. So if I have two of these books together, which one should I start if I want to start on my spiritual journey?
And also,
Yeah.
yeah, and also, I mean, would it be reading both? I also felt that it might be a little confusing. It would create more confusion, or it would be an enriching journey for a reader, to take your call like you did. So we would love to hear from you on that.
Uh, Honestly speaking, I haven't read that book myself, so I can't really comment on it.
Yeah.
But from what I can make out from what you have spoken, yes, definitely India has its materialistic past. See, the Vedic understanding was that there is no strict borderline between materialism and spirituality. That's why you must have heard about this thing, na? Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. So, Artha and Kama has purely to do with material prosperity and material enjoyment.
Right.
And sandwiched, so Kama and Artha are sandwiched in between Dharma and Moksha. So, you can't really kind of separate them. Spirituality and material life are integrated. You can't really separate them one from the other. And I think, I've shed sufficient light on this in my book.
Yeah.
If you remember from, I think, chapter 2 or chapter 3 of this book, I say that realistically speaking, most people in this world have got materialistic desires,
Yes.
and
Absolutely.
they're want driven. The
Yeah.
word that I use is they're want driven. The default setting of most people is that they're want driven, and from being want driven, how to move towards being purpose driven.
Purpose
The
driven.
entire rituals that are proposed in the Vedas are to help you along that journey from being want driven to purpose driven. So, intrinsically, the Vedas acknowledge that most people are want driven, and the Vedas also shows you how to satisfy your wants. So, the beauty here is you are trying to satisfy your wants the Vedic way, the spiritual way, uh, and while doing it, unbeknownst to you, subconsciously, you make the transition from being want driven to being
True
purpose
purpose
driven.
driven.
So it's not that you're in self denial, or it's not that you artificially try to renounce the world. No. Uh, Materialism has its place in the Vedas, it has its place in the Vedic civilization. It's perfectly allowed. Only that, you go by the Vedic method, and if you go by the Vedic method, you will, in addition to fulfilling your wants, you will end up also becoming purpose driven. Isn't that wonderful?
So true.
Yeah.
Exactly. So true.
See, in the modern day world, there's a lot of talk nowadays about being purpose driven. Like Simon Sinek's book, Start with the Why. And
Yeah.
I've heard so many self help gurus, so many life coaches, both from the East and the West, emphasizing more than any time in the past about how it is required to have a purpose in life, how to have meaning in life. Man's search for meaning. It's considered to be one of the finest books of all time by Viktor Frankl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So people are looking for a life of meaning. People are looking for a life of purpose, and the Vedas are offering it. And at the
Yeah.
same time, they're acknowledging that you start off being want driven, and then you move from being want driven to being purpose driven. So I think there is uh, I wouldn't say it is diametrically opposite. Materialism and spirituality, they can go hand in hand. It kind of, you make a smooth transition from materialism to spirituality, and
Okay.
you get the best of both worlds, I would say. That's the very formula.
So, Gopinath ji, I have one question here. Like in our life, many times we think about spiritual journey, and we want to start that, and then also it comes in mind like when we should have started way back, like. And is there a particular age which you think is the right age when we should start the spiritual journey, or it can be started anytime, or the other way? Like I have a son, if I want to motivate him, what will be the right age?
Yeah, it's a very nice question here. Recently, I was talking to one person, as you know, Ekta ji was mentioning that ISKCON as an organization, it is developing in different areas. We're also developing the field of parenting, uh, trying to help parents become better parents and things like that. So I was talking to one person who is a part of that committee who helps um, give classes to kids of different age groups, who designs syllabus for them, and who also helps parents uh, in inducing spirituality in their kids. So what he was telling was, typically any child, in the first 5 years, their psyche is like a sponge. Their mind is like a sponge. All they can do is kind of absorb impressions. They just absorb impressions. Okay, 5 to 10 approximately is the age for learning. So whatever you tell them, they just learn it. Like for example, like in school, I think between the age of 5 and 10, we are taught about 2 plus 2 is equal to 4, 5 plus 5 is equal to 10. And I have never bothered to ask them, why 5 plus 5 is equal to 10, why 5 plus 5 is not equal to 11. Because that's the
Yeah.
age when you just take in whatever is being taught to you. And post 10 is the age of reasoning. So after
Okay.
10, children tend to ask questions. Okay, you have told me this. Why? So the question why starts occurring to them after they cross the age of 11, 12, etc. So in the modern day world, if you see, because there is no impressions on spirituality given to children, and no learning given to children in the field of spirituality. So later on in life, some parents do realize that maybe if my child would have been more spiritual, maybe he wouldn't have got into bad habits, or he wouldn't have been led astray by bad company and things like that. But now, if you try to give some spiritual education to your child who is now grown up, who is now in his or her teens, it's only going to backfire, because that that kid has already reached the age of reasoning,
Yeah.
because there is no background of impressions and learning at all. The only impressions and learning that kid has is in the field of modern science.
Modern.
That's fine.
Got it.
Okay. So now, once the child grows up, even after the child reaches the age of reasoning, the child never questions the axioms that went behind modern science, the axioms that went behind geometry, etc. Now, I'll give you a simple example of Euclid's geometry. Okay, in Euclid's geometry, how do you define a line? Line, by definition, is the shortest distance between 2 points.
2 points. Yes.
No, that's a very rational way of defining a line, isn't it? Now, what's the definition of a point? Point by definition is something that has no length, no breadth,
No breath.
and no shape. Is that possible? It's practically impossible, because no matter how small the point is, if
It
you
is
look at the
measurable.
point under a microscope,
Yeah.
it will have some length, it will have
Yeah.
some breadth, and it will have some shape. So
But still we believe
it's
it.
a axiomatic truth.
Yes.
You believe in the existence of a point. It's
Right.
based on belief.
It's based on belief.
The
I'm so
Euclidean
glad all the
geometry is
engineers in
based
the
on
house.
belief. You have blind faith in the existence of a point. You
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
accept it.
Yes.
But even when children grow up, they don't question Euclidean geometry and the belief system in Euclidean geometry. Why? Because they have been fed Euclidean geometry since their very childhood. But when you try to feed them spirituality at an advanced age, they'll start questioning you in the belief in the existence of God, belief in the existence of the soul, etc. Why? Because the impression hasn't been given to them in their early childhood, and the learning hasn't been imparted to them when the
Yeah,
age
the
was right
time.
for their learning, between the age of 5 and 12, suppose. So I would say, till the child reaches the age of 5, give them a lot of spiritual impressions.
Hmm.
And
Got it.
see, that's how most of us grew up, is it not? I don't know.
Yeah,
At
Yes.
least in
Yeah.
yeah,
my
yeah,
case,
Yeah.
as we
Yes.
grew up, our parents used to take us to temples when we were young.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, most of us didn't get that learning.
yeah,
That learning is also important between the age of 5 and 12, wherein, little bit of reasonable explanations of the different aspects of spirituality is being explained by the parents to the kid, or it is being explained by someone to the child. And
yeah.
then, with that background, the child, even when the child asks questions based on reasoning, will find satisfactory answers, and then the child will be tremendously benefited, I would say, through spirituality. I would say the major problem with the new generation, the whatever you call it, Generation Z or Generation Alpha, whatever it is they're a little bit unbalanced. They
Oh.
don't know how to handle failure. They don't know how to handle reversals. They got these mood swings and all these things. And spirituality has a powerful balancing effect on people's emotions, balancing effect on people's lives, actually. And most Indians take it for granted because we have grown in a kind of spiritual ambience, and it's
So
only
true.
in the modern day world that the spirituality is going to the background more and more and more and more, and that is being keenly felt by new age parents, I would say.
New
if,
age.
if you see our temple on Saturdays and Sundays, wherein we have a lot of classes for kids, you will see it's
Yeah,
houseful. A
Yeah.
lot of parents are thronging to the temples nowadays because they are keenly feeling that their children have to be groomed even from a spiritual perspective from a very young age. The
Yeah.
awareness is growing. And
Yes.
yes, I would say from as early as possible, you don't have to kind of make it fun for children. Till the age of 5, that's what
Yeah.
we do here in the temple.
yeah,
When
yeah.
children are very young now, make spirituality
Fun
fun for them. Let them
for them.
enjoy it.
Right.
We have games, this, that, and some learning by the way. And then they can
Choose their
grab
own
onto
path.
spirituality
Yeah,
more firmly when they grow up. It
yeah.
need not be imposed on them. No need of
It,
True.
imposing it upon them.
Yeah, in fact, this resonates with me a lot because when I am a Kathak practitioner also. I teach Kathak dance as well, and when we introduce the stories of Radha, Krishna, and then Chechar and everything, but when I introduce them, let's say at the age of 12 or 13, they start asking all of the logical questions like how dare Krishna touch her and all of those questions. But when I introduce them at a very younger age, they just take it like, okay, this is a journey from Atma to Paramatma, and there is a metaphorical figure. And ironically, the younger, the students, they get it. So I think I completely resonate with what you said.
Yeah, that's true. And actually, all these questions have a rational answer also.
Hmm.
Apparently, questions which doesn't seem to be have a rational explanation do have a rational explanation, but for that rational explanation to sink in, it has to be on some foundation. That foundation has to be set at an early age. No, it's not that I'm not telling that rational questions shouldn't be asked. We encourage
Yeah,
rational questions also, but it has to be on a sound platform. I gave the
yeah.
example of Euclidean geometry, for
Very
example.
true.
Hmm.
At
Yes.
at some place, logic ends, and everything is based on a belief system.
Belief system.
Even when you see hardcore science, origin of the universe.
Hmm.
Okay. Uh, People sometimes ask us, okay, you say that God created everything. Who created God? And they feel that they have checkmated us. But then we can always ask them back. Like, okay, you say Big Bang started everything, but who created the Big Bang?
Big bang.
What
Hmm.
existed before the Big Bang? So
Hmm.
there has to be a starting point which is based on a belief system. So you got a
Yes.
belief system We also have a belief system. Only thing is that the modern generation is taught to ask the belief system surrounding spirituality and not the belief system surrounding science and other aspects of life. And that I would say is a big disadvantage, because if they're able to embrace spirituality as well, in addition to modern science and other things, they will be greatly benefited. That's my take on it.
Thank you, Gopinath ji.
That is a very fascinating, talk also, and I think how you summed it up, Gopinath ji, is that a blend of science which we all are inclined towards, and we just question spirituality as a whole, and we never question science. This is such a important note that you have dropped here, and it is a time to ponder actually, and think about this aspect, because this makes so much impact in our daily lives, and how we become as individuals. Also, just talking about the book, The Power of Karma Yoga, which we read, and which we are talking about, this beautiful chapter which Gopinath ji was talking about, moving from want driven to purpose driven. There's a very interesting chapter which also throws a lot of light on how you can take that journey and why it is so important, and sometimes how it happens. So you can pick up this book, and you would thoroughly enjoy it. There are so many instances that have been quoted. And also, coming back to the conversation that we are having, I wanted to ask you a very specific question, because when I started reading the book, I was in the first or second chapter when we're talking about the subtle art of letting go. When I just read the start title, and I was like, oh, this is sounding like something else. And and then you also quoted Mark Manson, and his bestseller book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Dash. So I was just kind of thinking that, also, you've talked about a lot of other things. You've talked about World War II. You talked about Alan Turing. You've also talked about Forrest Gump, and there are a lot of examples which even people today can associate. So it is not that you have to really go back and learn all your basics and learn the mythological part of it or the spiritual part of it, and only then you understand. So there are a lot of present day examples also which we have grown up with. But I found that there were a lot of Western author references. So I was just wanting to ask you that any specific reason why the book specifically talks about those certain aspects, because how the book progresses, it makes so much of sense.
Yeah. See, my whole idea and behind quoting these Western self-help authors, most of them are bestsellers, and see, I've used a lot of Western examples from Hollywood movies to
Yes.
World War II to uh, sports and all
Yes.
these things, just to make it relatable, so that
Yeah.
people get intimidated when they see a spiritual book. But these examples uh, makes you feel at home, and spirituality becomes more relatable. Okay, but when it comes to quoting Western authors, of course, in addition to making the subject matter more relatable, there's an additional reason why I did that. The reason is very simple. Most of the times, in the modern day world, people, even in India, are thronging towards self-help books, and that's a good thing. Even I love reading these self-help books. I read quite a lot of self-help books, and they make a lot of sense. But indirect thing that I wanted to convey to my readers by quoting them was, okay, fine, you have read these things from these self-help authors, but the Gita and the Vedas have been telling this for thousands of years.
Absolutely.
See, the knowledge all is already there with us. We just need to unearth it. See,
Yeah.
I give this example very often. Okay, there's this beautiful book called Deep Work by Cal Newport. Okay, it's a
Yes.
best-selling book. Okay, there it speaks about how having a work life from 9 to 5 increases your efficiency even from a material point of view. So I quote this book when I give my classes, or if I'm trying to help a person lead a more regulated lifestyle, etc. And while I quote Cal Newport from this book, in the same breath, I also make them aware. that our Vedic civilization was always about leading a regulated lifestyle. I never
True.
found my grandmother or grandfather staying awake beyond 9 o'clock or 9:30 at night. Even now in my village, at 9 o'clock all lights are off and people go off to sleep. And they used to lead a very regulated lifestyle, which you can call it 9 to 5 lifestyle. And it's the Western influence that spoiled our regulated lifestyle. They introduced overworking in our
Yes.
culture, and now we find people working from dawn to dusk, sometimes till midnight, till 1 o'clock at night, till 2 o'clock at night. These are the people who spoiled our regulated lifestyle, and now these are the people who are preaching back to us that come on, lead a 9 to 5 life. And the irony is, we tend to read their
Listen.
books and learning our culture. And if you read the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says point blank in the sixth chapter, Yukta hara viharasya yukta chestasya karmasu yukta swapna bodhasya yoga bodhi dukkha. Yukta ahara, you should be regulated in your eating habits. Viharasya, you should be regulated in your recreation, in your working habits. So, come on, it's already there. It's there in the Gita, it's there in the Vedas. Rather than looking for them in the Vedas and the Gita, and all self-help advice, all advice for self-improvement is in the Bhagavad Gita alone. You don't have to go beyond the Gita itself. So this was like an indirect message I wanted to convey to my readers. That come
And
on,
why?
yaar. Why you have to read all these people? They have brainwashed you in the first place. No offenses meant here, but they have brainwashed you, and now they're, washing you again. And we had it already in our backyard. Come on, dig in your own backyard and you will find a bigger treasure than you're searching elsewhere. So I tend to quote these Western authors in my book.
And that is what I had the feeling, and that is why I asked you this question, because the book very powerfully starts with quotations and teachings from Bhagavad Gita, and also a very relevant explanation to it, and then it suddenly moves on to this particular thing, and I was under the same impression, so I thought I have to ask you this question so that everybody should kind of listen it from you, yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things I wanted to ask Gopinath ji is like throughout the chapters you have talked about the spiritual identity, right? And you have continued that message in multiple chapters. How do you define your spiritual identity, and does it? And to follow up question will be: does it differ from person to person?
See, all of our spiritual identity is the same. That we are Atma, the soul, right? And all other identities which come on top of that are material identities. The identity that I am a man, I am a woman, or whatever it is, or I belong to this particular community, that particular community, or I belong to this profession or that profession, or I am a father, or I am a mother, or I'm a husband, I'm a wife. All these identities are material identities that are piled up on our basic spiritual identity, that we are spirit souls. So at the spiritual level, we are all equals. We are all the same. There's no difference. We are all spiritual by nature, and spiritually we are the same. And these identities make us different. And of course, as spiritual beings, we are unique in our own way. It's not that we are all one. We have got our unique spiritual identities also, but we are all the same in the sense that we are all spiritual in nature. That's what I'm trying to say. Pure and spiritual in nature, we are spirit souls. That's the whole point. And my narration in the entire book, it kind of is built around the principle that these material identities that we assume as we go through life, when we're not able to shed them, uh, that becomes the cause of a lot of heartache, a lot of headache, and a lot of problems that we go through in life. And that's what we call as the ego problem. Okay, so it's the ego that gives us different material identities, and the ego has a tendency to defend the identities that it has given us, the material identities that it has given us. And when you are not able to shed our material identities as and when they expire, I give this example often. I've given this example in the book also, which is very much relatable in the Indian context.
Yeah.
That there's this mother. Mother has the identity that I'm the owner of my son, and once
Hmm.
the son gets married, the ownership
Yes.
changes.
Yeah.
And the wife becomes the sole owner sometimes, and sometimes the wife becomes the co-owner, whatever the scenario might be. But the mother but the mother loses the identity of being the sole owner of the son.
Yeah.
And if the mother is not able to share that identity that I'm the sole owner of my son, then a conflict is sparked in the household between the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law. The simple point here is every identity has its expiry date. So it becomes difficult for us to let go of these material identities because we don't have something substantial to hold on to. So once we reawaken our spiritual identity, we've got something solid to hold on to, and it becomes relatively easy for us to let go of material identities. It's like a child is holding on to a knife. A child is
Yeah.
not meant to hold a knife because if the child continues to hold the knife, it might cut its fingers, it might hurt itself. But to convince the child to give away the knife is very difficult. So what do? You give the child a toffee, perhaps. Whatever you give, I don't know. When I was a child, they used to give me toffees. I don't know what modern kids want nowadays. Maybe they want an iPhone. I don't know. So whatever they want, you give it to them, and then they'll be so engrossed in the nice thing that they received that they'll find it easy to let go of the knife. So same
Hmm.
logic
Yeah.
here. Once you discover the joy of being a spirit soul, once you experience the joy of spirituality,
Hmm.
then to let go of these fleeting material identities become very easy. That's the
Yes.
entire premise on which the entire book is being built. So
Yes.
spiritually, we are all the same. So spiritually, the bliss and happiness that we all experience is of the same quality.
Hmm.
There's no difference at all. And it's the birthright of the soul to experience this joy, to experience this happiness.
Right. I guess you have already partially answered the next question that I have, but in the times that we are living in right now, I'm sure you must be getting this question a lot. That is it possible to be spiritual without being religious?
See, it all depends upon how you define spirituality, how you define religion,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Like when I was first introduced to ISKCON, perhaps even I was of the opinion that I would like to be spiritual and not religious,
Hmm.
because the kind of understanding I had of religion is something that divides.
Hmm.
That's the understanding that most moderns have,
Yeah.
that religion is something that kind of is sectarian. It kind of divides society into Muslims, Hindus, Christians, Jews. And if you see the modern day world, a lot of wars are being raised on the basis of religion.
True.
And uh, religion is being misused, I would say. And so a thoughtful person would like to keep religion at arm's length. And also there is one part of the story. Another part of the story is also that a lot of people who profess to be flag bearers of religion have let their followers down.
So true.
Isn't it true that
So true.
so many people who are supposed to be religious, people who looked up to them, they have turned out to be fraud,
Yeah.
swindlers, and so many scandals associated with them. And naturally, people who are more educated, people who are more thoughtful, and these are the category of people who actually read books, I would say. People who are more thoughtful and people who
Wow.
are more intellectual. These are the people who tend to read books nowadays. Otherwise, how many people read books? To be very honest, I would say the intellectual group of people are people who tend to read books, and they don't like to associate themselves with religion because of the reasons that I just now mentioned.
Absolutely.
And but if you actually dive deeper into religion, religion across the board, whether you take Hinduism or Christianity or any religion for that matter, if you dive deep within it, there is a unifying factor there. I think somewhere in the 1960s, there is this British philosopher called Aldous Huxley.
Yeah.
He authored this book called
Brave New
Perennial
World.
Philosophy.
Yeah, okay,
Perennial
Brave New
philosophy.
World.
So perennial
Yeah.
philosophy, in that, he was a philosopher and he kind of studied both the religions of the East and in the West. And in this particular book, he kind of jots down the unifying factors of all faiths. And he says that there is a perennial philosophy
Yeah.
that is all pervasive in all the religions of the world. So it's the one God who has brought about all these religions which you find in different places of this world, according to time, place, and circumstances. There is one God. It's not that the Hindu God is different and Christian God is different or Muslim God is different. No, God is one, known by different names. So if you understanding the unifying factors of religion, then you won't kind of shy away from religion, I would say, because then you'll start seeing spirituality and religion in the same light. Another thing is obviously that people who are supposed to be flag bearers of religion, who are supposed to be representing religion, have to be filtered out. I would say. What else can I say?
Yeah.
Like in a sense that
There should be a
we should
criteria.
use our discrimination. Like in a sense that yeah, it's a fact, and but that's not how it is supposed to be. People who are representing religion should truly represent the tenets of religion. They should truly represent the injunctions of religion. They should truly represent the scriptures, the teachings in the scriptures. And if they do so, then they will be people of impeccable character, actually. So this is one thing that I really learned after I associated with ISKCON, that religion has nothing wrong in it inherently. It's the people and the circumstances that surrounds it has given a bad name to religion. And I would say, I would go to the extent of saying that the so-called spirituality in the modern day world would be incomplete without religion, because the kind of teaching that you find in the scriptures will help you actually go deeper into spirituality, right? See, in the modern day world, spirituality, if I can put it into words, it's all about being a good person,
Hmm. Hmm.
isn't it? Being a good
Yeah.
person, and that's wonderful. That's great. That's great, I would say. But religion would take you deeper in being the best you can be. You can be
Hmm.
the best. And what differentiates spirituality from religion from this perspective is that if you're only spiritual and not religious, what will happen is you try to be a good person, but in the face of pressure, in the face of stress, you will let up. You won't be able to hold on to your principles. But religion will help you uh, become a good person from from the very depths of your heart, I would say, because every ritual that goes behind religion has a science behind it. Most rituals, a lot of rituals, as I said in the beginning, are superstitious,
Hmm.
but a lot of rituals are a detailed science, and all these rituals are designed to take that goodness to a whole different level, to a deeper level, so that no matter the pressure that you are facing, no matter the reversals that you are facing, you will hold on to that goodness. Under no circumstances will you let go of your character. So religion takes you to a different level of spirituality, and the proof is in examples like Gandhiji or Martin Luther King in the Western world. These were people who were hardcore religious, and they held on to their character, they held on to their values even under dire circumstances, isn't it? They were under tremendous pressure, but despite all that pressure, they held on to their principles because they were not merely spiritual, but they were also religious. So I would say being truly religious. Now, let me kind of qualify religion here. Uh, being
Yeah, very
truly
important.
religious, uh, being truly religious takes you deeper into spirituality, I would say.
Oh, that's
It
so
is such a brilliant
amazing.
take, and I think we should, make a snippet of this and run it
I
across
was going to
because,
say that probably
yeah,
this is going to be our eureka moment.
yeah, because all of us, like you rightly said, Gopinath ji, in modern world today, all of us are confused, very confused when it comes to religion and spirituality. And when people talk to us about religion, we tend to shy away talking about it because we think that we will be judged,
Yes.
basis
Yes,
what
yes.
we are talking about, be it any religion. Like you talked about various things, and you also talked about how gender or community or caste or everything is kind of defining your identity. That what people are thinking is their kind of materialistic identity. So I think this was such an important, I would say, important message that you gave to all of us. And also the book very, broadly talks about it, but the deep dive that we got from you is so
Yes.
brilliant. And I am so amazed that, readers belong to that breed of people that you talked about. And we are a house full of engineers today. So I
Oh, so
was
all of you
very
are
interested and
engineers, is it?
Yeah.
yes.
Oh,
Yes, yes,
nice
we
meeting
are.
all of
Yes.
you.
so so yeah, and a follow-up question to this. I think I
I
don't know,
was.
it will not be a trick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I was so happy when he talked about like people should read books, right? And I was just very happy like we started read a kitab just for this particular purpose in life where we
Nudging
bring reading to the
people to
people.
read.
Yes, yes. I think
So
it's a
yeah, nudging
wonderful
people more and
initiative.
more to read.
It's
But
a
yeah,
wonderful
also,
initiative. And I'm sure, you will have your times of discouragement
yeah.
because somehow, see, I see a very interesting trend in today's world. Everybody wants to be an author, but nobody likes to read.
Oh my god.
Isn't
Thank you
it?
for saying this.
But I strongly believe that you can't be a good author unless you read a lot.
I'm going to run this as a reel, and I'm sure it's going to go viral,
Thank you
Gopinath
for
ji.
saying this. Oh my God.
Thank you for
This
saying
is
this.
so true.
Oh my god. so
So,
many so many moments of so many moments wherein I could think that I have to pass it on to everyone I know. It is you have so many pearls of wisdom, I would really say, and the
thanks for
fascinating
kind words.
talk. Also, to put a follow-up question, which is a hard question for me. I'm sure it would not be a hard question for you, but do you believe in God, and if yes, of what kind?
Yeah, I totally believe in a God who is compassionate, a God who doesn't judge you, a God who's forgiving, a God who is who is thinking about your welfare much before you start thinking about him, a God who is like a perfect parent. A perfect parent is who? See, especially as children are growing up, good parenting is what? Good parenting means what? You're always keeping a watchful eye over them, but at the
Yeah,
same time, you don't micromanage them. See, the
so true.
conception of God that the Gita provides is exactly along the same lines. A God
Hmm.
who doesn't try to interfere with your free will. At the same time, is always watchful of you, and whenever you require his help, you turn towards him and he makes himself completely available to you. Isn't that a definition of a good parent?
So true.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
true.
So I would say uh, the God whom I worship is a God who is a perfect parent, more than a perfect parent, I would say. You imagine the best possible relationship in your life, a dream relationship in your life, and somebody who fulfills all the criteria of a dream relationship, whether be in terms of a parent-children relationship, whether it be in terms of relationship between friends or relationship between uh, husband and wife, the the ideal qualities that you're looking forward in any relationship, put them all together. If we can find it in one relationship, it's in that relationship between you and God. And that's the God that the Vedas talk about. That's the God that the Bhagavad Gita talks about. That's the God that the Bible talks about. That's the God that the Quran talks about. It's we people who have kind of, kind of marred that picture of God, kind of dirtied that picture of God.
So
So
true.
the blame is upon us, not upon God. God is as loving as He always was and will continue to be.
So amazing.
Amazing.
I have so many questions, but I'm sure, Ekta, we must move on to the next segment. Also because I can listen to you all day.
Thanks, you have been kind. You have been kind.
No, it's so fascinating actually. There are a lot of things that we kind of take for granted and we don't understand, and we just kind of don't dive deep into it. But, very simple thoughts that, that you talked about today, those are very simple thoughts which come to our mind so many times, but we just brush them out, or, we just kind of don't think about them much. And that is why maybe we are, all of us are getting very far from the purpose of our life.
Yeah.
That, my initial question wherein we started was that, we all are searching for ye zindagi ka matlab kya hai and why are we here. So I think, so wonderfully you've talked about it. And I'm sure Neeraj, I think Neeraj, when we were discussing today morning and we were talking about, this book and also the various chapters, there is a very interesting take that we were discussing on the simplicity, and I'm sure you want to want to ask about that.
Yes, so I'm not sure whether this question makes any sense, but I'll just put it out there. So there is, so while reading, I thought about something called as practiced simplicity, and then there is simplicity. And I don't know how to further articulate this question. Also, it just came to my mind because I see a lot of people in the book reading community, also at my workplace, also in my Katha classes, also many places where I can see if they take all the parameters that can be attributed to simplicity, and sometimes I can see through that artifice. I can see through that. So it's a practice simplicity. So how do I reconcile the difference between these two?
I don't know whether I got your question right or not here. Uh, but from what I kind of gathered from what you are trying to say, let me answer it. See, simplicity, which I am talking about here, is, like I kind of given an elaborate explanation of it in the book itself. But to put
Yes.
it very plainly, thoughts, words, and actions aligned. But the very way in which you kind of describe these people that you are coming across doesn't look like their actions are in line with their thoughts, because they're acting as if
Yeah.
they're simple, but in thought they're not trying to be simple. So it's like a self-contradictory kind of a thing. So if you actually go by the definition of simplicity, they don't fall into that definition at all. So you can't call them simple by definition.
So true. So true. And
So
we
if we
encounter
actually
these
go by the
scenarios.
definition, and if somebody is living up to that definition of simplicity, then they are simple, because they are, their thoughts, words, and actions are all aligned in a single line. So they won't act as if they are simple, but they are thinking otherwise. It can't happen, because by definition they have contradicted themselves.
Very true. Very true.
So I hope I am making sense now.
Yes.
Yes,
Absolutely, it makes
absolutely.
sense. It makes sense because I don't know how to put it in words, but sometimes when you are interacting with them, maybe there is some change in the energy, maybe there is some change in the, I don't know how to put it, but sometimes maybe in the habit of reading or maybe observing people keenly or having such deep conversations like we are having right now, that kind of makes it obvious that okay, I get it that these are not simple, or at least not my definition of simplicity.
Yes, absolutely. that was the whole point I was trying to convey in the book also.
Yes.
That if you practice real simplicity,
Hmm.
that's when you get the benefits of simplicity.
Yes.
If you are simply, acting as if you are simple, I don't know whether you'll be able to cheat others or not. You're cheating yourself. That's
Yourself.
for sure. That's for
Yes.
sure. And you won't be able to reap the benefits of simplicity any longer. So, so in order to actually able to practice real simplicity, that's why I introduced that particular chapter, because I figured that a lot of people want to be simple, but they're not able to get their head around what actually simplicity means. So you need to really define it and really elaborate on it. And I think that's one of the key chapters in my book, I would say. I
Yes.
loved writing that particular chapter because I felt there was an extra contribution that I was making uh, there in that particular chapter, which is not covered in the modern day world, especially because I wouldn't like to call out the Western civilization here per se, no offense meant here, but I would say a lot of this, you know, make believe simplicity comes from the Western world, Western civilization, I would say. uh, if you go to the villages of India even today, a lot of people are naturally simple. The natural simplicity that you're talking about, right? Kathak comes from Orissa. I visit Orissa very often, and a lot of Oriya people, they are naturally very simple-hearted. So, but this facade of simplicity is, the advertising industry has brought this about. I would say, because what is advertisement all about? It's diametrically opposite to simplicity, because you are trying to sell a product, speaking everything that it is not most of the times.
Yeah. Yeah. I can
Is it
completely
not?
agree on this.
Yes, yes, yes.
So just to
Also,
add to the simplicity which you talked about, Gopinath ji, I just wanted to add one more thing to this. Like the purpose of life is very important. You have mentioned in your book, right? Now, any message you want to pass to the newer generation, as you said, Gen Z or Alpha, like what are the dangers if you don't get a worthy or a good purpose in life? Because nowadays we see more inclined towards the want, as you had highlighted earlier, rather than finding the right worthy purpose to look forward to.
and
Yeah.
before you take this question, I also wanted to tell all the readers and to you as well, Gopinathji, that the titles of the chapters are so interesting that you don't feel like not reading it. So, like Anurag was specifically mentioning this. So, to all the viewers who are listening to this and who will listen to this conversation later on and not now, there is this chapter number 13 which talks about, is your purpose driven life on a slippery slope? And therein Gopinath ji gives very brilliant examples. So this is a worth reading chapter. And yeah, I will not say more on it. I think I'll pass it on to you because you will be the right person to talk more about it.
Yeah. So yes, talking about the newer generation, yeah, you see, finding a purpose, and that to a worthy purpose. I've devoted an entire section, a thoughtful section, I would say, for people to introspect whether they're leading a life of a worthy purpose or not, right? Whether their purpose is on a slippery slope or not, as you pointed out, Ektaji. So yeah, I'm especially for the younger generation. It's like, I would call it. I'm really concerned for them. First of all, I'm really concerned for them. So the way world is progressing and the way they are kind of going adrift. The main reason I can see is because they don't have a purpose in life. Hands down, and and especially a human life is a life of a higher level of consciousness. Now, animals, they don't have that consciousness to ask questions, deep philosophical questions. Uh, Human beings have that consciousness, a deeper consciousness, a higher consciousness, which makes them more philosophical, which makes them more purpose driven. So, in the human form of life, if you don't have purpose that drives you, you are going to go crazy. As simple as that. And that's why you see, in the modern day world, mental problems are on the rise because life is becoming more and more superficial. A want-driven life is a superficial life.
So true.
As long as you're dabbling with the wants of life, as long as you're dealing with a very superficial life of satisfying your senses, you're leading a life which is very selfish. Now, of course, we are selfish to one extent or the other. That's given. But I'm speaking about extreme selfishness, which is becoming more and more observable in the modern world. It's the I generation, it's the me generation, whatever you call it. What happens is, it's unnatural for the human consciousness, and the human consciousness can't handle a life which is purely want driven, which is purely selfish, and then you don't know what you want because you don't have the right direction in the form of spirituality, and you don't know, you feel that vacuum within you. I speak to a lot of youngsters, and they say that there's a vacuum within us and we don't know what is required to fill in that vacuum. They're clueless. They don't know that they need a purpose. The answer is as simple as that. You need a higher purpose in life to maintain your sanity, if not anything else. So the world is going to lose its sanity. The younger generation is going to lose its sanity if they don't find a purpose in life. And the Gita is the book, the go-to book to find a purpose. See, 5,000 years ago, there was just one Arjun who was confused regarding what he's supposed to do. But nowadays, every house has an Arjuna, right? At least one person who is not able to figure out life. So I would say more than any time in the past, people are in need of scriptures like the Bhagavad Gita, and obviously in need of books like the book that I have written also. Because that kind of simplifies the Gita for the new generation, I would say. And a lot of youngsters who have read my book have given me a lot of positive feedback, I would say. And I've met a lot of my readers who have said that they read the book twice, back to back. So that gives me a lot of encouragement, honestly speaking. I think a part of the reason for that is also because when people pick up such a book, they don't know what to expect. And sometimes they get more than what they expect, and then they end up reading it twice also. Because the kind of examples that I use is you don't tend to expect it in a spiritual book per se. So I think, I don't know, I'm happy about what I did. I'm working on my next book and I signed up with Jayco again. And they've done a brilliant job with my first book, and I'm sure they'll do a great job with my second as well. I think you're muted, Ektaji. I'm not able to
Muted,
hear you.
Ikta.
Oh, I'm so sorry. The work from home glitches. So, yeah. So, what I was saying is, are we considering this as an official announcement of your launch of the second book?
Third
No,
book.
even I don't know when it's going to come out, but I'm already working on it. Yeah.
That's
And
amazing.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
Yeah, yeah. Even
yeah,
I'm looking forward for it. I love
amazing.
reading. I love writing both.
And yeah, I mean, such nuanced perspectives, like you also talked about it prior in this talk, that will only come, when the person who's writing the book is also a voracious reader or has read, vividly, widely, and, very different kind of literature as well, and also has kind of, embraced it. So I think that all of this powerful thought process and everything, like you rightly said, comes, also from being a reader, and a nuanced one at that. So, so thank you very much. And just one last question before we just quickly move on.
I'm not
Your
able to
voice
hear
is
you
gone.
again.
Ikta, your voice is gone again.
And
Yeah.
is it? Am I
Yeah.
audible?
Yeah, you're
Yes.
audible.
Yeah,
Yes, you
sorry.
are audible now.
So, yeah, so I was just saying we never realized that we are more than 1 hour up. We're 65 minutes in the talk, and it just flew. The time just flew. So, there is just one, though we have many more questions to ask, but I'll just pass that. Maybe, for when you announce your next book and we invite you again, and, we can talk
Yes.
about that. But this is more from a very personal point of view, and I wanted to you to please pass on this message, or inform, or kind of tell people that, if they want to read Bhagavad Gita, there are so many versions of it, and people find it very difficult to pick which one. And what personally what I have felt is, unless and until you have a mentor who can actually guide you, you will not understand even a percent of it. Even if you, and I mean, it's a process. You can't read Gita in one go. It will take all your life maybe, and then again, once you, just like we reread books, once we reread any chapter, any adhyay, or any shlok that is mentioned, every time basis the situations in our life, a new thing kind of pops up, and we kind of think. So if, since you come from that practiced atmosphere, and you know it the best, it would be really nice if you can talk about it and tell people that how they can probably learn or read Gita with a mentor. And I know ISKCON is doing a lot of stuff on that, but I think you would be the right person to talk about it.
Yes. See, to begin, I would like from my side, like I read other versions of the Gita before I became part of ISKCON also, and I one of the reasons why I became a part of ISKCON was also because I was totally uh, enchanted by Bhagavad Gita as it is, which is the ISKCON's version of the Bhagavad Gita, translation and purports given by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. So I think from my side, that's the go-to version of the Bhagavad Gita that I would strongly recommend to whosoever is sincerely wanting to understand the Gita and apply its teachings in his or her life. That's one thing. And as you rightly pointed out, I've been studying the Gita. In fact, maybe I'm studying more than most other people because I'm here full time for the past 25 years now, so to speak. 25 years. 20 years in the ashram, 5 years prior to joining the ashram when I was associated with this con was I was a student at the same time. So, still, it's a bottomless ocean.
Yeah.
The knowledge of the Gita, as you say, every time I read the Gita, every time I read a shlok, I find a new meaning out of it, which I never kind of figured out before. So it's a book with unlimited depth, and definitely because because it's a book with unlimited depth. Even now, if I approach a person who has spent 40 years studying it,
Hmm.
like my guru, Radhanath Swami, he is somebody who joined in 1970. He's an
Hmm.
American by birth. He has written, Jayco has published, they're the publishers and distributors of his The Journey Home in India,
Yes.
his
Yes.
biography, his memoir. Uh, so he's my spiritual guru, Radhanath Swami. So he joined in 1970 and calculated maybe I don't know how many years it is, 53 years
Hmm.
now. So he has been studying the Gita about 53 years, and he comes from a wholly different level of consciousness. That's another thing. But even from year wise, he has studied many more years the Gita
Yeah.
than I have studied. So it makes sense for me to learn from him because he will have deeper insights than I have. So
True.
naturally, an integral part of studying scriptures like the Bhagavad Gita, especially, which has got unlimited depth, is to study under somebody else. Why? Because they
Hmm.
definitely have deeper insights than you because they have been
Absolutely.
studying it for longer. The time factor matters a lot,
Yeah.
right? So, mentor goes a long way, and
Yeah.
even the Gita itself recommends that tad
Yes.
vidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadikshante te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshina. It says that you should approach a guru. Krishna
Yeah.
clearly says to understand the Gita in more detail. And as you rightly pointed out, in ISKCON, we don't claim to be gurus really. Guru is a tall order. So
Hmm.
it's not a cheap word.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we act like teachers of
Hmm.
the Gita and try to distribute this knowledge in whatever way possible through our classes, in whatever we can on social media also. So if anybody wants to study in details, let them visit the nearest ISKCON center and approach somebody there, and they'll definitely find a Gita class going on uh, almost every day of the week, and they can become a part of it. And maybe they'll find some class going on in their locality also. We are spreading very fast, I would say. We are all pervasive in Bombay. So in some nearby places, there could be a class going on. Be a part of it. Sincerity is the most important qualification here. if a person is sincere, then as Jesus Christ said, uh, he said, knock and the door will open, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The same thing applies here also. Knock and the door will open. We sincerely have the desire to understand the Gita, and the doors will open for us to understand it in more depth.
Amazing. I'm so fascinated by this talk, and I'm so thrilled as well. I hope you enjoyed the talk just like we did with you.
Absolutely, it was fun, and especially when all of you mentioned, even though it's again a material identity, but that also makes a difference, right? All of you are engineers, so I was happy. In addition to being avid readers, may not be as avid a reader as all of you are, but I'm definitely an engineer, at least by degree wise. So, so it was fun, and it was I enjoyed a lot speaking to all of you. Thanks a
Thank you,
lot.
Gopinath
Thanks
you.
a lot.
ji.
Thank you.
And your book, so all of you people, you have to pick up this book and read this. There is so much that you can read from this book. And, if you have any questions for Gopinath ji, feel free to DM us, and we would we would love to ask him those and get back to you. Or we can definitely have him one more time whenever he is available. But thank you so much
Thank you so much.
for these wonderful insights, and thank you, Jeko, for giving us this opportunity for having this fabulous conversation, enlightening thoughts, and lot many things I think that we are going to take away, and so much material that we want to pass on to people. And it was as fascinating as reading this book, having a conversation firsthand, with you. So thank you so much, and thank you for coming
Th-
here.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having me, and thank you, Jaco, as well. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank
Namaste.
you, Gopinath.
Thank
Thank
you.
Namaste.
you.
Namaste.
Thank you.